Welcome to Technology and Security. TS is a podcast exploring the intersections of emerging technologies and national security. I'm your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. I'm the founding CEO of Strat Futures Proprietary Limited and an adjunct associate professor at Deakin University. My guest today is Min Livanidis. Thanks for joining me, Min.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Min Livanidis is an expert in cybersecurity, risk and governance. She's currently the Chief Security Advisor for Public Sector at Microsoft and Chair of the University of New South Wales Institute for Cyber External Advisory Board. She is also the co-chair of Home Affairs Resilience Expert Advisory Group and a non-executive director for the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre. She was the head of digital public policy for Amazon Web Services and has experience across government, including the Australian intelligence community, as well as consulting at KPMG and PwC. Thanks again for bringing your experience and expertise to the Technology and Security podcast, Min.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Gadigal people. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea and community. Min, what did you find most interesting about your time in intelligence?
I think like anybody that goes into intelligence, I applied for it as part of the grad program without really having any idea what it entails. This was back in 2009 that I was going through the selection process. And on joining, you went through a really rigorous training program to get you up to speed on technology and all aspects of what it means to work in signals intelligence. And at that point, I would never have said that I had any sort of technical background. I would have said I didn't really have any technical knowledge, and that was probably true at that point in time. But what the agency did incredibly well was take people from any background at all, and we came from such a diverse number of degrees. I had friends that came through in the same grad group as me that were mathematicians, marine biologists, people like me that studied international relations, any number of these. And we were turned into signals intelligence analysts. And it really just goes to show that you can draw from an extraordinary talent pool and turn people into an incredibly competent workforce, which is a really quite pertinent lesson for all organisations to learn today as we're having these conversations around talent shortages and whatnot.
What do you think they did that helped turn people with a really broad skill set, the things that you just identified are all critical thinking, problem solving kind of degrees into really technology savvy workforce?
I think it was the acknowledgement that you couldn't come into that organisation and have all of the knowledge available to you. Just by virtue of what it is, it's a top secret environment. You are not going to know all the things about how telecommunication systems work unless you specifically studied that. You are not going to know the fundamentals of intelligence operations. You're not necessarily going to understand the legal arrangements and structures around how the intelligence community is formed. So they bring you in and they teach you all of that. They train you up in it. And it's a structured program over time that exposes you to different parts of the organizations and gets you up to speed. It helps you develop that skill base, that knowledge base. And it's the investment in the people that I think, from my personal perspective, and I'm obviously a bit biased, really sets it apart and why it's got such an extraordinary alumni out there in the world doing really incredible things across both private enterprise, government, wherever the case may be.
In your own words, government has an important role in promoting innovation and safeguarding the public. How do you think our policy and regulatory settings are managing those two roles right now?
When did I say that? I don't even know where you got my quote.
In like 20-something. Look, I only have what's available publicly, right?
That's right. I spoke at CEDA's AI event. So I think in terms of those two things, promoting innovation, protecting the public, they are sometimes presented as being at odds with each other. I really don't think that's the case. I think the difficulty with trying to promote innovation as a concept is innovation needs to be in purpose of something. We come up with ideas because we are trying to solve a problem. We're trying to make something better. So having that purpose-led vision for innovation is incredibly important. And likewise, in terms of those safeguards and guardrails, it also needs to be purpose-led. It doesn't really mean anything to just say protection. What are we talking about? What are we trying to protect? What are the things that we value? So in that sense, I do see them as complementary concepts. They should be purpose-led.
And how do you think our policy settings are achieving that? Do you think we've got work to do in one or both of those areas?
I think there is a lot of promising progress. The work that the government is and has been doing around responsible AI, the setting up of the AI Safety Institute, the setting up of the NAIC that's now led by Lee Hicken, these things all point towards a proactive and productive approach to the use of a technology for the purpose of solving problems and for the purpose of creating an overarching benefit to society. And doing so in a way that is grounded in a level of technical literacy in the context of the AI Safety Institute, but also acknowledging that no technology operates in a vacuum. We've got quite a complex ecosystem of laws, all of which intersect with technologies in some way. And it's really important to recognise that as well.
I'm going to come back to safe and responsible AI, but first, how can we better promote innovation in small Aussie startups and companies?
I think it's about helping entities understand what technologies are available to them, recognising that not everything is a hammer for every nail. Certain types of technologies are going to be really useful for doing certain types of things. One thing, and I'd be remiss not to mention it as a cybersecurity person as well, recognising trustworthy technologies that these entities can use. What sort of technologies can you leverage, whether that's from a cloud service provider, SaaS provider, whatever the case may be, where they've got inbuilt security practices that gives you an increased level of assurance. And in the case of AI, where they've got responsible AI built in as part of their practice, and that dedication to transparency as well. So giving a level of literacy around what the technologies are, what to look for in your service providers, in simple, pragmatic terms, I think will have a quite outsized benefit to our small and medium businesses.
Where should we be fitting in this education piece?
I think at the state government level, there is a lot that can be done, certainly through TAFEs and universities as well. Whether that is a TAFE program that is talking about small business administration, how you set these things up, including a component in there around technology, could be super beneficial. These don't need to be long and onerous courses. It could just be something as simple as a module that helps somebody understand what questions they ought to be asking. I do think in the technology space, we perhaps have a tendency to overcomplicate the issue. And then you're almost overwhelming people with information of what they must know. Well, we know that's not how people work. So let's give them the information they need to be able to ask the right questions.
Yeah, absolutely. As someone running an Australian startup, you are so overwhelmed with the actual doing. It is so difficult to get down in the weeds to understand, the different data sets and the different kind of models, and that you just can't expect people to go to that level of depth when they're so stretched in other parts of a company.
No, and even when I give general awareness presentations around either responsible AI or cybersecurity, one of the things I'll often say is security is everybody's responsibility. Sure, in an organization that is true. It's other people's responsibility more than others. You cannot expect your entire workforce to be a cybersecurity expert. That is not a reasonable expectation, and we don't expect it in any other area of expertise. So let's be sensible about this. How do we do security for people, not in spite of them, for them?
Absolutely. So going back to safe and responsible AI, you've previously said that it's not the sole domain of government. And we've also seen a lot, previously about fluctuating trust in AI in Australians. Where do industry and others fit in? What's being done, and is it enough?
Well, our Vice Chair, Brad Smith, often talks about an entity like a Microsoft having a very unique role in this ecosystem. You would scarcely find an organization on earth that isn't a Microsoft customer in some way, shape or form. That gives us an incredible responsibility in terms of how we develop and deploy these types of technologies, and that commitment to safe and responsible AI is uncompromisingly at the heart of that. It is absolutely essential. And if you even look at things our CEO have said, he'll talk about if you give people tools that they trust, they can transform industries. And we've seen this level of transformation happening with cloud computing. I think the statistic was in 2010, when Azure was really first stood up, we had something like 4 data centers globally, and now it's over 400, and over 80% of workloads sit on cloud globally. That's an extraordinary shift in not even yet 20 years. With the AI trust trajectory that we're seeing, that people are trusting it less, there is a lot of work to do to ensure that we are continuously building that trust, maintaining those open dialogues with the parts of the community that these technologies are going to touch. It's one of the reasons why Microsoft has gone out and developed those commitments with the ACTU to make sure that workers are brought along this journey, not just having it foisted on them. These are the sorts of steps that are so important to ensuring that we're actually going to maximize the benefits of these sorts of technologies. People need to be willing to use them. They have to want to engage with them. And a big part of that is having that open dialogue.
It's interesting because people absolutely need to want to use something, and yet there is clearly an economic imperative to have it being used as well. So it's kind of two tensions.
Yeah.
I want to go to a segment. What are some of the interdependencies and vulnerabilities between AI and cybersecurity that you really wish were better understood?
Well, I think in the first instance, understanding what type of AI we're talking about, fully appreciating it is not a monolith technology, it is a constellation of technologies, and it is something that has been in use in the cybersecurity space for a long time, particularly through machine learning and deep learning. On the defensive perspective, these technologies are deeply embedded in cybersecurity tooling. From the perspective of newer forms of AI, particularly generative AI and agentic AI, there are a couple of core concepts that all entities should really understand when they're thinking about the risks associated with the technologies in terms of how they're used in a corporate context and in terms of how they can be beneficial from a defender perspective and then also how threat actors will use them. So there's lots of different ways to segment this up.
Could you talk us through an example of that?
So in one sense, we have any sort of AI system as just another piece of software. You apply your standard security controls to it as just another piece of software. These are just your run-of-the-mill security engineering tasks. What are my controls around it? How is my identity and access management structured? Is the posture well and truly in place there? What are my data governance controls around this? All of those basic questions that we would typically have in place. You call those a deterministic risk. Then you have your non-deterministic risks, which are broadly categorized as risks introduced by virtue of what the AI system actually does. So in the case of agentic AI, we're talking about agents that are created to perform a series of tasks and have some level of decision-making rights. More or less. They are goal-oriented. They are created to say, go and do this thing. They will go and do the thing. So what are the risks that can arise from that process? And these are non-deterministic risks because, number one, they're probabilistic models. There's not necessarily going to be a state of being where a singular input results in the exact same output time and time again. Probabilistic by nature, the things will move. They won't just stay static. We can make these things, these security events, these safety mechanisms more or less likely by how we effectively engineer and design for these elements. It's one of the reasons why the Microsoft approach to responsible AI is so important, because we do a lot of red teaming on our own environments to ensure safety of AI models, not just doing pen testing and things like that, but actually going in and trying to break them in terms of the prompts that you provide. These are the sorts of things that are very different for an organization. It's not as simple as saying, I've got a requirement to apply the essential aid. How do I go about that? It's another whole series of steps. It's a whole new discipline and way of thinking about a technology that arguably has not really existed before.
I'm going to pivot here. What are the AI and cybersecurity trends you'll think we'll see more of in 2026?
I think in terms of tech trends, for this year, I see really probably an acceleration and amplification of trends that we're already seeing. There isn't a lot of emphasis on tech change. And I think in the security space, that can be to our detriment, because the things that we consistently see are not all that advanced. When we look at Microsoft's own research, we produce a digital defense report every year, and that comes out with a number of really valuable insights in terms of what's actually happening out there in the world. And it's based off 100 trillion signals that we collect and synthesize every single day. If we look at an identity compromise as an example, more than 99% can still be prevented with MFA. There's nothing sexy or particularly exciting about that. And in terms of successful identity compromises, or password compromises, I should say, I think it's something like 97% just based off brute force or password sprays. These are not sophisticated means of anything. They are looking at those fundamentals of cybersecurity, flossing and brushing your teeth elements of cybersecurity that are not particularly exciting, that just require consistency and daily practice and diligence. These are still the things that ultimately matter the most when we talk about cybersecurity in real terms of what's actually happening out there. But at the same time, and this isn't, I think, at all contradictory to the previous point, the things that AI is going to enable, acceleration at speed of amplification of attacks, all of these sorts of things, a lot of those things are going to prey on human frailties. And this is why I can't emphasize enough that we've got to have people centered in how we think about security. Just from the jump, we do security for people, not in spite of them, but for them. I say this as a mantra repeatedly. And this becomes incredibly important in this era because we also know that AI is being actively used for mis and disinformation. It's being actively used for scams, phishing emails, impersonation of people. Like, we know all of this stuff is going on. So what are the things that we need to put in place to protect people? But we know that we as humans, we're not very good risk decision makers. We need to tell people, don't look at your phone while you're driving. We are talking about things that are viscerally direct potential dangers to us, but we don't think like that. So in an online environment where risk is infinitely more abstracted, well, we certainly don't think about these things in that context, in that way. So how do we humanize cybersecurity as a challenge? How do we center people in terms of how we design all forms of technology so that we're not dependent on people to make 100% perfect risk-based decisions in every interaction they have in an online environment? And if you throw the statistics together in terms of the level of interaction people just have with their work device, their personal device, etc., there's an enormous number of interactions every single day. If we're depending on every single one of those to be correct, we're in trouble.
I mean, how do you do that in practice? And not just because it's difficult in an organizational sense, but you're absolutely right in the sense that we're on our devices a lot. We can't be expected to defend things in a constant, it's just not the way the brain works. Independently, I have just started a new podcast called The Cognitive Edge, and I'm working pretty, heavily in improving cognitive performance in high stakes decisions, precisely because the information environment we're currently in is actually a really difficult one for humans cognitively. But how do you do that when systems and ecosystems span personal, professional, and you've got these kind of all of these different components of systems? How do we integrate them in ways that nudge humans towards not necessarily having to be so vigilant and being able to support them to make the right choices?
And this is where I think there's real beauty and simplicity. If you just think about one of the easiest things you can do, it's using a password manager, not depending on yourself to be able to come up with a number of passwords that are sufficiently long and complex enough to give you confidence that it can't be broken through one of those fairly basic mechanisms of brute force or password sprays. That is a simple thing that you can do. But we've also got research out there that says only 50% of people really use them. And a lot of people abandon password managers because they're worried about the password manager itself being compromised. As unlikely as that may be, just because of how password managers work, if you've got, say, an Apple device and you're just using the one that's built in to your phone. So thinking about these things in that way, what is the thing that is going to reduce my overall risk profile? Not eliminate risk, because we can't do that. We're never going to eliminate risk in this space, just as we've never, as humans, eliminated the problem of crime in that sense, or in the cyberspace, eliminated subversive means of statecraft, espionage, sabotage, and subversion. We've never solved these things. It's not in human nature to be able to solve them. So how do we reduce the risk and the likelihood? Putting in place those simple mechanisms to protect yourself and your organization is still one of the most effective ways. There are a lot of future risks that we are continuously thinking about as well, to say, okay, we've got this current state of being, and modern cryptography is sufficient for now, but what about a post-quantum future? This is where having those public-private partnerships in place to be able to design systems that are resilient to this as a possibility, that's also got to be an essential part of the conversation, but that still doesn't mean we dismiss these basics that can protect people right now.
People so often describe technology as moving too quickly. But as someone who has worked in the tech space for quite a long time, what do you wish people understood about the industry?
Things do move quickly to a certain extent, but I also think we can broadly see where things are going. And always there is always the benefit of hindsight with these things. But if we even look at historical examples of technology changes, you start to see certain patterns emerge. So if we look at the invention of the telegraph, we're talking mid-1800s. At that point in time, there was a lot of concern that, number one, the technology was unreliable. How did you even know the veracity of the information that was coming through? How do you even validate that? Was it making information spread too quickly, and was that overwhelming for the humans who would be receiving it? All of these questions are incredibly familiar today, but it was also understood that the technology would have significant benefits. So there was a lot of investment at those early stages to say that, well, we understand that this technology is going to have these benefits. We need to build up trust in it as a concept. How do we do that? We're in the exact same state at this point in time. We can see with AI that there's going to be a lot of advancements in it. We understand this. What I don't think is well understood enough at this point in time is genuinely just the benefits that it's going to be able to provide. And this comes back to that question more around intent. We're not just going out giving a bunch of hammers to a whole lot of organizations and saying, go find some nails. We can't do that. We need to be much more intentional about how we're discussing these things. Because these current technologies can have such a broad number of use cases, they can be perceived as having an incredibly broad level of risk, when that isn't necessarily true, because it depends on what are we actually talking about. I think a lot of the conversation gets lost in probably overly broad interpretations of what we're actually trying to say about any of these technologies, going back to the previous point around AI being a constellation of technologies, not just one thing. But then also going back to my previous point of not everybody being a cybersecurity expert, well, not everybody can be an AI expert in terms of the understanding of the different types of algorithms and models that exist out there. So I think cutting through all of that, getting towards some level of understanding that you don't necessarily need to understand the deep mechanics of something to know how to use it, we've got to get to that place. People understand the utility of computers without really understanding how they work. And that's a normal thing.
You are really well known for your work on the Resilience Expert Advisory Group, which you've been in since 2021 and have been the co-chair since October last year. Can you take my audience through how this group advises the Department of Home Affairs and promotes critical infrastructure resilience?
Yeah, of course. So we sit within the Trusted Information Sharing Network as one of the sort of permanent advisory bodies that exist within there. We now also have the Supply Chain Expert Advisory Group as well. And effectively, we exist to provide that level of expert guidance to all the other members of the TISN, which is comprised of all critical infrastructure sectors as defined in the SOCI Act. We've produced guidance around crisis communications. We've developed the Resilience Health Check tool, which is basically a online platform that allows organizations to work through it as a group to really assess their level of organizational resilience. It's really about those organizational decision-making mechanisms and the culture that exists around those mechanisms to say, what is our level of transparency? What is our level of comfort in having these uncomfortable conversations with each other? How well attuned are we to the mechanics of our crisis management plan if something goes wrong? How well placed are we to not just bounce back in the event that something goes wrong, but improve on the basis of that and implement continuous improvements in times where things have not gone wrong? Like, these are very human and I think very grounded ways of approaching probably something we think of too much from organizational processes in the abstract, whereas it's actually a muscle that you've got to exercise. It can't just be a diagram written on a page to say, in the case of this, decision X goes to person Y. No, it needs to be living and breathing as a concept. And that's really what we do.
In terms of that broader resilience piece, how do you think Australia is placed in terms of communications and infrastructure resilience, noting, the number of kind of global threat actors that have been playing in this space in the US, Canada, Australia particularly?
Yeah, I think we've done a lot of work and a lot of really important work to get clarity in the governance arrangements that not just exist within government, but for critical infrastructure providers as well. I think it's incredibly positive from, again, our resilience and mindset perspective that we are quite self-critical, and we'll look at things like the operations of the SOKI Act. There was just a review on that. We're waiting to see what the outcome of that review is. The refresh of the cybersecurity strategy going into Horizon 2, constantly acknowledging that there's room for continuous improvement and never saying, we'll draw a line under that, job done. We put a compliance regime in place, that'll be the end of that, lads. We don't take that mentality as a country, and I do think that is an incredibly healthy way to approach it. And acknowledging that we're not perfect, we're not always going to get things right on the first try, that we do need to go back and revisit these things and ask questions around operationalization of legislative mechanisms or governance mechanisms. Putting a critical eye to that and saying, how can we do it better with a robust consultation process, it's incredibly important. So I do think we're fairly well placed, globally speaking.
I have a new segment in 2026 called Grounded. What should we focus on, stay connected to, and grounded in this year to keep sane amid the chaos?
That's an awesome question. Step away from all devices. Take a moment to get outside, as the kids say online, touch some grass. I'm a quite obsessive gardener myself. One of the things that I love to do in my spare time is get out in the garden. I'm living the inner western suburbs life of the Greek woman with my multiple fig trees, etc. Getting your hands dirty, doing something tactile. Remind yourself that you exist in a place in time. You don't exist in abstracted environments. Connect with your community, be part of something. That is such an important thing, particularly when we are inundated with information day in and day out. It is so important to step back and actually remind yourself of your physical being. We're physical creatures. Get involved in something physical.
I love that answer. I want to go to the contest spectrum. What's a cooperation, competition, or conflict that you see coming this year?
I think there is already quite a lot of cooperation, but particularly in this space, government, academia, industry coming together to look at broad-scale societal problems and saying, how do we start to find answers to some of these questions?
I want to go to a segment called Emerging Tech for Emerging Leaders. What do you see as the biggest shift for leaders and leadership from emerging technologies?
I tell you what I don't want to see anymore. I don't want to see people getting up and saying, I'm not a technical person. Not a technical person. What does that mean at this point in time? I don't really think it means anything to see yourself as not a technical person. It's quite a self-defeating concept in that sense. It's sort of like I was saying at the start, where I joined ASD, I didn't think of myself as a technical person. I became one. And, I'm somebody that has learning difficulties. So I never thought that I would have had the capacity to learn things in that technical sense, because I can't really read numbers in sequence. I've got dyscalculia. Getting past that is something that I saw as fundamentally self-limiting. It was hard. Certainly your confidence takes a knock when you're surrounded by people that you see as much more literate in these things than you are. But over time, I came to realize that I brought a different perspective to these sorts of things that was incredibly valuable, that other people probably didn't necessarily have. So I'd encourage everybody not to think so much from that emerging technology question in terms of what am I going to struggle to understand. Flip it around. What is it about how you approach the world that could benefit how we approach technology? Probably that more than anything else.
That is excellent advice. What are the key alliances in AI and cybersecurity that we need to focus on?
I do volunteering with the Red Cross. And one of the really interesting conversations I've been having in the context of that role is around international humanitarian law and the protection of critical systems. And so the Red Cross has been developing the Digital Blue Badge project, which is this concept of how you essentially provide a digital marker that is equivalent to a Red Cross on a building in a war zone environment. It's been such a rewarding thing to think about because it is such an important question to so many people in the world. And it's not something that we've necessarily fully thought through and developed in terms of how we conceptualize these sorts of humanitarian protections in digital environments. So that sort of intersection of technology and human rights, and I know some of your previous guests are much more well-versed in international humanitarian law than myself, but it is a field that is ripe for this kind of collaboration. And that's something that I really, really want to see more of, and I'm excited to be part of in my own small way.
I'm really sensing a theme from our conversation today, which is something that I'm really passionate about, which is this kind of the intersection between the physical and the cyber physical. Is, like you said, these alliances need to exist to help us navigate an increasingly cyber physical world. And so many of the systems that we have just are not there yet. So that is a really interesting and important alliance. I've previously written about the characteristics of good intelligence. I can post a link in the show notes, but essentially good intelligence needs to be timely, purposeful, actionable, accurate, provide a value add, and be unbiased. You've touched so much on purpose today. And whilst those were written in the intelligence context, in the Australian intelligence context, many of them are useful for anyone working in industry or even individuals trying to navigate a contemporary information ecosystem. What skills did you learn as an intelligence officer that you think are useful, and what principles can translate well?
I think one of the most valuable tools anybody can apply really to anything that they do in a work context is the analysis of competing hypotheses, which for those of you
You've just outed yourself as a complete nerd here.
Thank you. That was my intention. For those of you that don't know, analysis of competing hypotheses, you take a series of hypotheses and you essentially need to try to prove and disprove all of them. And you try to prove and disprove with the same level of rigor. And it is designed to eliminate or address as much as possible the human problems of cognitive biases, and in particular confirmation bias. And it's just an all-round excellent way to keep yourself sharp. One of my favorite terms is if you've got two people in a room that agree 100% of the time, one of them isn't necessary. It's absolutely true. You need to be able to challenge yourself. You need to have people around you that are willing to challenge you as well. And standing up the team that I did in NBN, I very, very deliberately built a team of people who were unlike me, who would teach me different things. I would be able to teach them things as well. And we had a really robust and productive working environment where all of us brought a different perspective to things. And it assisted with this sort of analysis of competing hypotheses because I was running an intelligence function in that context. Embedding that as a practice and continuously pausing and asking yourself, okay, this is what I think, but what if I flipped that around and tried to prove the opposite? Is such a powerful tool. It is just such a powerful tool for any form of decision making.
It is so essential for big organizations, which often lose the capacity to hear diverse voices, at least as you kind of go through process. It is so important to have mechanisms both to seek those diverse voices and then handle them when they're there. The issues that we are facing in information overload are exactly what you described that we need in terms of competing hypotheses. We need to be able to select the right signals. We need to be able to balance them against each other and understand where they fit in the context. And then have, like you say, leading that team at NBN, be able to actually bring diverse voices in, hear them, respect each other, and come to some kind of, pathway forward.
Willingness to be uncomfortable is a superpower.
Totally. And some of us are just born to make people uncomfortable. We don't intend it, but it happens. As someone who's worked in both industry and government, what do you wish people knew about decision-making in each?
They're very similar. It's often not the type of organization that matters as much as the size of an organization. And there's been organizational research on this, that as organizations get larger, decision-making becomes more fragmented. It's difficult to maintain connections across the diversity of different functions that exist within an environment. So it just becomes complicated. And that's why we build these structures around governance and org charts, all of these different things that add to complexities of existing in a large organization. They exist for a reason. They're trying to address this, again, very human problem that we can only manage so many social interactions at any given point in time, and a cacophony of voices is not necessarily an easy thing to manage. I really reflect on this, that we're really not, as adults, that dissimilar to what we are as kids. We've just got better impulse control. But the basics of just being human, they're all there. And I've come to appreciate this even more as I just watch my own kids grow up. The way they interact with the world, the way they see the world, the sorts of disputes that I have with my 4-year-old son as he's trying to bargain his way with me into getting one more episode of TV at night, it's not dissimilar to what you experience in a workplace. We're just talking about human beings. And I think remembering those key elements of humanity that, we all get a bit irritated at work every now and then. So what? That's not the end of the world. It's how we choose to respond to that and interact with each other in a way that's respectful and constructive with tools like that analysis of competing hypotheses, the mindset that brings, the willingness to be uncomfortable. These are the things that ultimately make all the difference and make you the sort of person where people actively want to engage with you. And that is so important in this space. People talk about technology problems. I think a lot of people in organizations are so worried about looking silly because they don't know something, they don't know the specifics of something, and they're in many instances afraid of being left behind. Let's approach this with some compassion and acknowledge that, of course you don't know this. It's not your job like mine to read and know about these things day in and day out. How can I help you understand it and become more comfortable? I would love to see more of that, generally speaking.
I want to go to a segment called Disconnect. How do you wind down and unplug?
Oh, and like any good gardener, I can go on about it for hours. You just get me started talking about my favourite type of tomato to grow, and I'm off like a rocket.
I mean, I was expecting from a Greek person that you would bring up tomatoes first, but you went for figs, so you surprised me.
I think the other thing, one thing I'll say about gardening, and I think this is such an important skill because it's something, and I'm teaching my kids about it as well. There are no shortcuts. It's just about being observant. The most powerful skill you can have as a gardener is being observant and attuned to your own little corner of the earth, your own little patch of dirt. What is going on within it? What's happening outside of it in terms of weather patterns? You need to understand the relationship between all of these things to be able to garden effectively. And a lot of that is just something that you learn through really close observation. So I find it very soothing. It's almost a meditative process where I look at something and like, this one's not doing very well. We already established I'm a nerd, right? So
We're just taking it to the next level.
we'll just lean in on this. But if you think about this and you say, okay, you've got to be attuned to the external environment in terms of weather patterns, your own microclimate, etc., right down to what's happening in terms of soil science and the interactions between all of the different bacteria and fungi and the living ecosystem that exists under our feet. Well, isn't that just a remarkable thing? And you get to be part of that and help guide it within your own personal environment and then see quite literally the fruits of your labor. And it teaches you so much about patience as well.
Yeah, there's something so beautiful about gardening and being in nature in general. And that connection to self, this connection to like our human biology, that we are actually creatures in an ecosystem, not just a tech ecosystem, but the natural one.
Exactly.
What have you been reading, listening to, or watching lately that might be of interest to my audience?
Well, I have to say, I probably have incredibly depressing reading habits. My wife is constantly, she'll look at the pile of books that I bring back from a bookshop and she's like, what are you doing? I'm currently reading a fabulous book called Hitler, Stalin, Mum and Dad, which is along the same lines as East West Street, a remarkable family history that's interspersed with how global events affected these families. And it's an incredibly sobering book. It's incredibly moving. It's also incredibly hopeful in so many ways. I can't speak highly of it enough. It is just such a gorgeous book. I'm very much a creature of 20th century history. I tend to follow the bouncing ball of my interests. So the other book I'm currently reading is a biography of Noel Coward. playwright, actor, songwriter, simply because he kept coming up in other books that I was reading. And I thought, I don't know anything about this man, so I'm going to do a bit of reading about him. And it's just, I think that willingness to just let go of preconceptions of the things that interest you and just follow a little query, follow a little thought bubble and see where it takes you.
You're really showing people what being an intelligence officer is like, ending up in a rabbit hole about some person. You're like, I don't know about this person, but they've come up 7 times.
But exactly. And it's that level of curiosity that is the true skill set of being so good at these things, and why you think about these sort of conversations we have around education, and there's been a very heavy emphasis on STEM. But again, most people I knew from my time in intelligence studied all sorts of different things. And it was the strength of bringing together different skill sets, different types of thinking from those very diverse backgrounds that lend its real strength to that kind of environment. So I worry about us prioritizing one form of education over another for exactly that reason. The more homogenous it becomes, the less powerful it becomes.
And curiosity is such a key feature, irrespective of what your foundational domain is.
It's the thing that will keep your skill set current. So that question you asked before around emerging leaders in tech, what do they need to know? The thing you need to appreciate more than anything else is to understand and be willing to engage with what you don't know. That's the trick. It's finding joy in learning about new things and finding joy in being challenged by learning about new things rather than finding it intimidating. It's a difficult mindset shift, but I think it's one that's incredibly valuable just overall.
Did you want to say anything on the most underappreciated ethical and strategic risks of AI? We've covered a lot of things, but, what are for you the most underappreciated ethical and strategic risks?
I think the core strategic risks to me is not having, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, not having clarity of purpose in how we are choosing to use these technologies. And I emphasize that because ultimately we are making a choice. It isn't something that is just happening to us. We have to actively choose and be very deliberate and purposeful in how we engage with these things to ensure that we are actually maximizing our investments and to ensure that our workforces have the skills and understanding they need to be able to make constructive use of these things while feeling comfortable. Again, going back to that point about not understanding something and finding joy learning how to engage with it. These sorts of environments that are very open about learning being a process, not an end state, that we need to understand the use cases of a technology that we're going to deploy, being able to marry these concepts to our organizational purpose, our strategic risks, all of these fundamental things that we take for granted in large organizations. None of those fundamentals change just because we're putting AI as a word in front of it. They're still the same. They're still fundamentally the same mechanisms. So let's just ground it in that. We exist within these organizations that are just ecosystems in and of themselves. How do we best incorporate these technologies to complement what that ecosystem is, does, and needs to do? And let's not overcomplicate it while we're at it, because I think that's probably one of the big stumbling blocks.
My final segment is Need to Know. Is there anything I didn't ask that would have been great to cover?
Well, you didn't ask my favorite type of tomato. That was the obvious.
I mean, heirloom. Is there any other favorite kind of tomato? I'm sorry. What's your favorite tomato?
It's a hybrid.
Okay.
It's a dwarf hybrid called the Rosella Purple. It's great for anybody in temperate climates like Melbourne. Just through the course of the conversation, if I was to say what are the fundamentals of what people need to think about, especially as it relates, and I'll just limit this to the security of AI, getting back to those core concepts. Determinative, non-determinative risks, understanding the elements that you can control as part of a shared responsibility model, and then never forgetting and losing sight of the people in your environment, and that security is ultimately about people. They need to be trained. They need to be aware of what these technologies excel at and the things that they need to be cautious of. Take care of those 3 things and put your governance arrangements in place, because without governance, security falls over. It is the scaffolding in which all of security hangs. It may not be sexy, but it is the most important part.
Min, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really fun to chat.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Technology and Security. I've been your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. This podcast is brought to you by Strat Futures. If there was a moment you enjoyed today or a question you have about the show, send an email to the address in the show notes. Please rate, review, and subscribe to help promote technology and security.